Welcome back to Save the Kales. We're gonna get started on our vegan hot wings. And these are gonna be made out of seitan. Now, seitan, let me just explain what that is. First of all, it's spelled S-E-I-T-A-N. I know it sounds like something else, but it's actually wheat gluten. So if you have a gluten intolerance, you may wanna try this recipe using tofu instead. But wheat gluten is extremely low in fat, super high in protein. In fact, about 100 calories of wheat gluten has about 15 grams of protein. So it's really not terrible for you unless you had a gluten intolerance. But we're gonna get started, and I'm gonna use seitan today because the texture is really chewy and it kind of has a more like meaty, chickeny kind of texture for these hot wings. So it starts off like this, and this is actually the wheat gluten powder, and we're gonna make a kind of a dough. So there's about 2 cups of that, and you can find that in health food stores. And about 2 cups of water. And then I'm gonna add to that, just for a little bit of flavor, because this has no flavor at all until you start adding things to it, a little bit of a chicken seasoning. Now, chicken seasoning, a lot of them are just seasonings that you would put on chicken. It doesn't actually contain any kind of like chicken in it, but just read ingredients. And if you're unsure, you could always use like a powdered vegetable broth just to give it a little bit of flavor. All right, so once we have that, we're gonna mix through, and you will see that this immediately starts to turn into kind of like a dough. And that's exactly what we want. Okay, and once you have it in its dough ball, get your hands in there and really mix everything through and mix the seasoning through really well. And you can see that the texture, it is really squishy and certainly a different texture than something like a tofu. So this is really fun, and if you don't like hot wings, if you don't like spicy food, you'll be able to use this and make, you know, really any kind of sauce for it. You can put it with some pasta and marinara sauce. So this is just a really basic recipe, and you can also go crazy and start putting all kinds of spices in here and seasonings in here. All right, so that is pretty good. And mix through, we'll get the rest of that off the bottom. This is fun to play with. When I was in Girl Scouts, we had a field trip to the Auntie Anne's pretzel factory, and we got to make our own pretzels, and that was one of the greatest moments of my life because I always wanted to play with the dough. So you can live out your dreams too when you make these. All right, so now that we have the dough, because we're doing these kind of like buffalo wing bites, we're gonna take it apart into little pieces. So this is just a pan with parchment paper. You don't need that, you can just put these on your counter, but for the sake of cleanliness, we're gonna rip a piece off and just start pulling these little pieces off with your hands and kind of squish them together. You want to make them a little smaller than you would make like a mini meatball if you were trying to make some kind of like a lentil balls or mini meatballs. Because what's gonna happen is as we cook them, they will expand to about 2 or 3 times their size. So you kind of want them to be almost a little too small because they will get bigger. And the smaller you make them, the more you can make, and then it looks like you have more food. So if you have a lot of people over your house to watch the football games, you'll be able to feed more people this way. And we're just gonna do that with the whole amount. And while you're doing this, you just wanna make sure that you have a great big pot of water boiling on the stove, because when we're done here, we're gonna add these to boiling water. So once your water has come to a boil, go over and drop these in, and drop them in individually. That's just so that they don't get next to each other too much and turn into one giant blob. So drop them into the boiling water and keep an eye on it because they tend to rise and then the water tends to boil over the top. So just keep an eye, get rid of some water if you're noticing that it's going over the top. So let's go get these in the pot. All right, so our seitan chicken has been boiling on the stove for 30 minutes, and we drained it. And just make sure when you drain it, when you take it off the stove, that you kind of take another bowl or something and push the water out through it, because it's very spongy, so it has a lot of water in there. That'll help it cool off. So once it's cool enough to handle, you'll see it looks like this. It's in all these little pieces that we pulled apart. So right now what we're going to do is just bread that, and we're going to bake this. So at this point there's no oil in this at all. And I have here just some regular breadcrumbs. I guess that's about a cup, and this is maybe a half a cup of panko crumbs. Panko crumbs are those like Japanese breadcrumbs that are a little bit coarser, and that's just to give it some variety. You can use one or the other. I think using regular breadcrumbs definitely helps though, because it sticks on the pieces a little bit better because it's so fine. So we'll put them in there, and we're just going to throw a couple pieces in at a time and toss them around and get them coated and put them on our baking sheet. Make sure your oven is preheating at 350 degrees. And you're just going to put them on this baking sheet. It's okay if they touch a little bit. It's not really like cookies where they're going to blend together or anything like that. They hold their shape pretty well. And you can also, feel free to add some spices or herbs to this seasoning if you want. Something like shredded coconut would be really good in here. If you then wanted to fry them up, that would be pretty delicious. All right, so once you have all the pieces coated in breadcrumbs, you can go ahead and put this in the oven at 350 degrees for 25 minutes and take them out, and we'll be ready to cover them with sauce. So while our vegan chicken is cooking in the oven, we're going to get started on our hot sauce. And this is a little bit of a twist from a typical buffalo wing sauce. We're going to use sriracha, which is one of my favorite hot sauces. You can find it pretty much any grocery store. It's an Asian hot sauce. And some vegan butter. So you can find all different kinds of vegan margarines. Use the one that you like the best. And add that to a saucepan. You're going to add 1 cup. And we're also going to use some apricot preserves in this. So just find some kind of apricot preserves, whatever kind you like. We're going to add a half a cup of that to our saucepan. We'll get those in there. And a half a cup of that sriracha hot sauce. And I like this kind the best just because it's not too vinegary. It's a little thicker, it's a little spicier, it has really good flavor instead of just being hot. So that's what I'm using here. So that's a half cup of hot sauce. Now, if this is too much for you, if you don't want to have all of that margarine and oil, you can also use any kind of sauce you want. A store-bought buffalo sauce that's vegan, or a barbecue sauce, like anything. Go crazy, because this chicken, as I said, is going to have a very neutral flavor. The last thing we're going to add, though, to the sauce we're making is some arrowroot powder. And this is just the powder that's going to be used as a thickener. So instead of something like cornstarch, this is just a white powder that has no taste at all. And it's going to, instead of the sauce being kind of watery, this is going to help give it a more gravy-like texture. So we're going to add that too. We're going to mix everything with a whisk as this is on the stove boiling. Well, our chicken is out of the oven and cooled, and our sauce is ready to go, so we're ready to plate this up. Now, one of the ways you can do it is just to put these pieces on a big platter, especially if you're a little wary about how spicy some people might like their food. You can put them on a platter like this and let people dip for themselves. And especially if you're having a football party or people over to watch a game, you can just lay out a whole bunch of different kinds of dips and sauces and let them go crazy. So put some of that in there. There we go. And that could be one platter. Another thing is you can get a mixing bowl and put some of the chicken in there and pour the sauce in and have it already covered. Stir everything through. Stir it gently. So remember, you have that breading on there. You don't want that to all come falling off. There we go. You can add those to a different plate. And I have to say, I think they look pretty convincing. I've done this before at parties, and people who weren't really thinking about the fact that all the food I make is vegan food didn't really realize that they weren't actually chicken until afterwards when we were talking about it. So I think that anybody that comes to your house is going to be really impressed with these vegan hot wings with sriracha apricot sauce.